Our next speaker is another online presenter. I'd like to welcome Professor John Rolfe, who is a Professor of Resource Economics at Central Queensland University, and he's based in Rockhampton. John has a number of research interests, but specialises in non-market valuation, regional development, environmental resource and agricultural economic issues. He has over 120 referred journal articles. I just stumbled over that because it's so awesome. In applied economics, and has co-edited 2 important reference books on the topics of non-market valuation and benefit transfer in 2006 and 2015. And any economists in the room probably have used those books a lot in their learning. John is the independent chair of the Gladstone Healthy Harbour Partnership Independent Science Panel and a member of the Great Barrier Reef Independent Science Panel. John, if you start going over time, I will jump on the microphone and let you know. So please welcome John.
Thanks, Anthea. I hope you can all hear me well, and I'm sorry I'm not there in person. But I want to give a little bit of an overview to where there's market opportunities here. So a little bit of a shout out for markets to begin with. They're very useful when you've got really complex demand and supply opportunities, so lots of variation in a system. And we use them really widely for a lot of different supply chains in commercial worlds. One of the big reasons why they're so effective is that they respond very quickly to new information. And we're all aware of how commodity prices jump around so much. They're also very useful in that people don't tend to argue with markets because they're voluntary. So they might hate some of the price signals, but they accept the power of markets. And that's really important when we get to a lot of producers who might be mistrustful of government. Price signals are probably an easier way to interact with a number of different people. Just an illustration of the power of markets. These work really well when you've got large variations in prices or the costs of doing things. This graph here shows the cost of achieving nutrient reductions from different aspects of sugarcane production. Each one of those bars is an average of a lot of information. So there's a heap of more complex variations in behind these graphs. Now, looking at the interrelationship between markets and social sciences, a key reason why we're looking at markets is it's another tool set available to change behaviour. That's the main thing we're interested in. But to make markets work, participants have to be predisposed to being involved. And that's where social science is really important to help economic design to understand how do you get people to be involved. And that's not always easy. So the participation question's a major issue. The other big issue here is dealing with issues of trust and angst about government sectors or government controls. So one of the challenges with the green markets that I'm going to talk about is it still involves government design. And so those issues of trust don't go away completely. And I think the social sciences can be very helpful in understanding how to better design these market mechanisms to achieve that trust. I'm just going to put up an example of one market mechanism, and then I'll talk about a few in a minute. But this is one you're all very familiar with, the Emissions Reduction Fund in Australia, which is basically our carbon market. Now, that's grown enormously over the last few years. We now have a lot of private buyers and sellers as opposed to just having the government buying. And we're now having secondary agents starting to develop products and engage actively in this market. So it's becoming a very important and well-functioning market and will grow further in the next few years. Now, just to put a little bit of context, I'm interested in green markets, but just to understand how these develop, the government has been helping to design markets for environmental outcomes over the last 20 years. And these can largely be grouped as market-based instruments. And these are things like tender mechanisms, which provide price signals, or offset mechanisms, which are quantity controls, or even market friction type of mechanisms, which provide eco-labels or better information and change behaviour that way. Green markets are a subset of these. They basically are standalone markets like the carbon market, where you've got the government doing the design and setting the rules so as to get the trust in the system, but then you have multiple buyers and sellers, including private buyers and sellers and sometimes government buyers and sellers. But a well-functioning market has multiple buyers and sellers, and that distinguishes them from simpler forms of market-based instruments. So the classic case we've got here of a green market is the Reef credit market. One of the most unique environmental markets in the world. It's been going a couple of years. There's been a lot of very active people in the Reef space who've done a great work in designing this market. There's been a couple of big purchases, so a couple of big buyers of the credits, which include the Queensland government and the HSC Bank. And there will be others hopefully into the future. So far, they've signed up about 11 major projects on sugarcane farms. These are all water quality projects to achieve nutrient reductions. And they've achieved about 35.6 tonne of nutrient removed of it, and there are 10-year contract agreements. The growers get paid each year for 10 years. And it works out about 4.2 credits per hectare. The purchase of the credits is roughly about $35. It's a little bit unclear how much money the growers get, but it would be less than that because of program costs. Now, one challenge here is that market is still not really active. And if you look at the graph on the bottom right, you can see why. So if you look at the costs that are predicted for most of the nutrient programs in the Great Barrier Reef, they're really high. The red bar shows roughly what the Reef credit market is paying, so much lower than the cost of most actions. I think it's interesting that still the government will fund huge amounts of program to reduce nutrient reductions, but only a smaller amount into markets like Reef credits. And I think that at the moment the funding levels are not right to achieve the outcomes. So this is the crux of the presentation. Each row here shows a different market mechanism that's relevant to sugarcane production in the Reef. And they go from quite simplistic in the first one, which is just the addition of eco-labels, through to green markets, through market-based instruments to green markets. So they're more and more complicated. None of these are perfect at the moment, but some of them have got great opportunities. So moving down, conservation tenders and biodiversity offsets have both got some potential, particularly for wetlands, but they are probably limited in their scope. And I think until we can get what we call stackable credits, we can get multiple benefits being paid for, they're not really going to fly well. The Reef credits is the major green market mechanism that's available at the moment. It's been specifically designed for the sugarcane industry, although it's possible to expand to other sectors. Its challenge is low participation. And I think that it means that the prices are too low. So we're not seeing enough demand come through from government and private industry. Now, ideally, private industry wanting to purchase environmental governance, social credits, ESG credits, would pay money into this. But the ESG market is very confused at the moment. So I think there's a danger that we won't see the flow of funds in. The carbon market's going to be huge, so turning to that next. And there's potential in agriculture for payment for things like soil carbon. But at the moment, there's not enough evidence that the sugarcane industry can reliably supply soil carbon improvements for the minimum period required of 25 years. So even though there's huge demand, I don't think the supply is feasible. A missing market at the moment is the next one, and that's where there are reductions in nitrous oxide emissions. So every time a cane farmer reduces fertiliser application, there's a flow-on effect of lower nitrous oxide emissions into the atmosphere, and that's a very potent greenhouse gas. So if we could give credits to growers for reductions in nitrous oxide emissions, that would provide an extra price signal, an extra benefit for reducing fertiliser emissions.
John, we're going to need to wrap up on time.
Yep. The second last one is renewable energy, such as biomass generation in the mills. That's limited because of high capital costs. And I think the real opportunity is in biofuels and ethanol. And that's where there's large growth, particularly in specialty fuels, but it will require probably some diversion of sugarcane into ethanol. So that's basically it. Lots of potential, but all of the options have some issues to consider, and they're very sensitive to government rules. So I'm happy to leave it there, Anthea.
Thank you, John, and stick around for some questions.
I will. Thank you.